that piece is super important, because what it tells the consumer is they're not trying to live in la la land, or they're not trying to sort of hide under the covers until the storm passes by. They're well aware of what's going on, and that sort of, from the consumer standpoint, is like the first layer of like trust building into this new phase of what you're going to be doing.
You're listening to Legal Skinny Podcast with Trisha Barita. I'm a 15-year licensed practicing attorney in the state of Texas. I created Legal Skinny because when I've been invited to do educational seminars on different subjects in employment law, employers and HR professionals would often ask me, where can they find out a little more information on this or a little more information on that? Look, I get it. There's a lot of resources out there, but sometimes it's confusing and people are so busy. Sometimes people have only 30 or 15 or maybe even 5 minutes in their day to devote to learning something new. On this podcast, you'll hear me have discussions and interviews on topics relevant to employers. Disclaimer though, Legal Skinny is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. Also remember, laws change or they differ by jurisdiction. So this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you. The launch of an event or piece of your business has always had several key elements in order to make it successful. This is needed whether it is an internal company-wide event or an external conference open to others in your industry. During the COVID-19 pandemic, employers and business owners are having to think about how these are going to happen, especially when we have remote workforces, virtual events, CDC and OSHA guidelines, mask orders, social distancing, and other new parts to configure. Yet the celebration of these events and company launches do not stop because we are in a pandemic. Companies know the economy needs to move forward, and figuring out how to do things differently is a challenge. Companies are thinking of how to make employees and participants feel safe and still have a successful launch or event, or how can we implement these safety protocols and messaging. Today, my guest is both a friend and fellow entrepreneur, Pierr Castillo. Pierr is the owner of Topstar Group, parent company of Topstar Marketing and Topstar Events and Entertainment. Topstar currently works with select Chick-fil-A locations in Houston, as well as companies like Typhoon Texas Water Park and South Shore Harbor Resort and Conference Center. Pierr's event production company is also the proud producer of LeaderCast Bay Area Houston, the world's largest one-day leadership event, and the Bay Area Houston Women's Conference. His mission is to build remarkable brands and give back to the community. Pierr enjoys spending quality time with his family and listening to Latin tropical music or enjoying good sushi with friends when he's not busy working on all these different ventures. Since my topic is The Party Never Ends, I wanted to tap into Pierr's creative knowledge on this issue and how he's been working with his clients on these various parts of launching or developing an event. We had a thought-provoking chat, so I hope you enjoyed this Legal Skinny episode, The Party Never Ends. Welcome to the Legal Skinny Podcast, Pierr. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Trisha. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell my listeners a little bit about what your business is.
So I am from the Bay Area, Houston area. I grew up in LaPorte and I live in Deer Park, but I built kind of most of my business around this part of town. I absolutely love it. I have been in the event and marketing space for a little bit over 15 years, and 9 of that has been as an entrepreneur, having my own marketing agency and event production company. And we're actually in the middle of launching a brand new project, getting into the retail side of party planning and events and stuff. And so we're kind of excited about that, and real busy, but really excited to get to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, because that's actually, it's you're very timely that I'm having you on right now, because I want to talk about businesses and employers launching and events right now, especially during COVID-19, and what traditionally you would advise and how clients to do it, and then the transition. And here you are right in the middle of a launch, and it's just great that I'm getting you for an interview.
Yeah, so we you're 100% right. Things are shifting and moving in terms of how we adapt and pivot our businesses and our strategies so that we can stay relevant and we can survive and be able to continue. So the retail expansion for us as a company was kind of in our strategic plan that we made back in 2017. It was called Top Star 2020, a clear vision for success. And in that strategic plan, we had three sort of special projects or things that as me as the owner, I have these like crazy dreams that happen overnight, and then like I show up to my staff the next day and I'm like, guys, like this is what we need to do. Like, we do events, we're marketing events, we're helping clients market their events. We need to come up with a way to sell the supplies that these people are using for the event so we can like make some more money or whatever. And so they're like, oh my gosh, Pierre, where do you come up with these things? So then a couple of months go by and I show up at the next meeting and I'm like, you know what? We're doing events. We need to eventually have our own event center. And so, anyway, a couple of years ago, we decided to open up infrastructure to build an advisory board because of all my crazy ideas. We wanted to kind of figure out a way to sort of rein that in and sit down with folks that sort of specialize in their area that can, help me see like blind spots and ways to sort of look at, doing things intention or with intention, and also build out a strategic plan that would allow us to kind of stay within our lane, but also be able to kind of build a vision of, hey, what do we want to do, next year, and what do we want to do, in 5 years from now? What do we think our brand and our company looks like? And so, but yes, to your point, one of those special projects within that strategic plan was this idea of building out a retail operation or a party store that would allow us to kind of expand our business. And so it originally was supposed to launch last year, but then what's the saying, like, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, and so that's the interesting thing about strategic plans for me is that great, and they're super valuable. They've been very valuable for me and helping to grow my business. But you better believe 100% that it's not going to necessarily pan out the way that you plan, particularly when you're looking at something that's 2, 3, 4 years out. So when we were in the 2016, 2017 time period that we implemented our advisory board and we built out this 2020 plan, we obviously had no idea COVID was coming. We had no idea that a lot of things were going to happen along the way. And so at the end of 2019, we were like, okay, 2020 is going to be the year that we launch this retail operation. And we were in the process of working with a consulting company that was going to help us with all of that. And we started making some headway in January. And I think it was just a month or two after that COVID, sort of hit. And so that completely threw a wrench. But I will say that kind of the biggest, silver lining in all of that was that we sort of had a plan for what we wanted to do with that project. But then when Corona came, we also then had to figure out how to pivot and rethink, like, do we really want to do this? And if we do, what is it going to look like when we do decide to deploy this project? And so that took us a good 4 to 5 months, because this COVID thing has been kind of a brand new thing for everybody on planet Earth. And so we've been trying to figure out, like, okay, what's next, and at what point what point in this process do we decide to try to take a leap of faith and say, let's move forward with our plans? And so that's kind of where you're catching me now, is that COVID came sort of in early March, and then that was March, April, June, July, and so it took us 3, 4 months to figure out what kind of the strategy and the pivot and the plan forward was going to be. And then the end of July, I said, all right, I'm gonna plant my flag and I'm gonna move forward with it, and I'm gonna figure out a way to make this happen. And so here we are in the midst of all that. Long-winded answer, but here we are.
That's interesting to me that you have these, these strategic plans. It sounds to me like you're pretty open with your team about what the plan is and then the planning process. And of course, while they may not be entrepreneurs themselves, they're watching you go through this and sort of you have a plan. And obviously the plan has been needed to be adjusted, I guess,
Right.
certainly, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that events and launches, have changed now due to the pandemic. I have a lot of friends, and I know you do, with businesses that are in the sort of entertainment or, restaurant type business, and bars, and it's just a change now of now these sort of spaces where you would normally go to sort of launch things. It's just everything's different now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the one of the interesting things about sort of the makeup or the infrastructure of our business is that on the marketing agency side, so we actually have Top Star Marketing, the agency side. That's really a B2B type of operation, right? Where we're talking to other businesses and helping them to brand themselves and create a good brand image. And our tagline is "Brands Endeared." And our mission is how can we make your brand an endearing brand so that it lasts forever. And so on the event production side, which is sort of a separate part of the business, the Top Star Events and Entertainment, that's where we typically will end up dealing on a more of the B2C side, the consumer side. And on the on for events, we produce some events in house that we do ourselves, like the Barry Houston Women's Conference, which is an event that we've done for 3 years and now going on our fourth year of doing it, and it's grown year after year. And so, but the nice thing is when we're dealing with a client where we're helping them produce an event, we aren't just sort of telling them all these theories and things about what they should be doing. We, on the other hand, are also doing our in-house events where we're sort of kind of walking the talk, if you will. And that's kind of been an important piece of kind of the DNA of how we've evolved our business, is being able to go to somebody and say, like, we're not just going to be consultants that are going to be telling you what to do, but in reference to that, we're also going to be showing you that the stuff we're telling you to do is also the same exact things that we're doing for our in-house events. So it plays for a really great balance in terms of, establishing that credibility for your clients in terms of like, okay, now COVID is here and now we've got to figure out what to do moving forward. And we've sort of spent a good amount of time talking with our team about what we're going to do about our stuff before we go and kind of, like they say, like, you don't want to be the darkness of your home, and the light in the street and darkness of your home, like telling all these people how to do all that stuff. And they're like, wait, your stuff is falling apart. And so that's been kind of an interesting layer to how we've built and, the infrastructure of our business to say like, hey, make sure that what we're saying is also something that we're willing to stand by because we're doing it ourselves.
That's interesting. So you're trying to figure out protocols. You're trying to figure out the safety stuff. You're looking at the CDC. You're looking at,
Right.
Governor Abbott's orders and, the
Right.
local orders and going, okay, how many people can we have if we try to do this in person? How do we determine like, we dealing with, different types of messaging? And is that something that you openly talk to your employees and team with?
Yeah, so within our team, I think that's kind of sort of where it starts, right? Like we sort of kind of have this communication strategy that we call kind of the inside out strategy, which is we start within our internal folks, certainly with my management team first, and to talk through like what is it that I think we can begin to start talking about in terms of our own stuff, and then what is it that we can begin to communicate with our clients about what they should be doing with their brands or with their operations, and do we feel confident about doing that? And then once we sort of feel good about that, then we can say, now let's go to the next layer, which is maybe the rest of our employees or our contractors that are doing work for us, and talk to them about what we think this next phase of recovery or getting through this pandemic is going to look like, so that we can enlist them and get them on board, so that as we're talking to a client, an external, an outside client, that they're getting kind of the same unique, cohesive message about what TopSpire is doing. But so I'll give you an example. Um, so COVID came right before Easter. It was like literally like a month before Easter, and so on the event in entertainment side for us, we are used to we have two Easter bunnies that typically go out and they get booked to go all over the place, go to real estate offices, do photo booths. We've been out at Kima Boardwalk, at Pleasure Pier, working with some really great clients on activating the Easter bunny and egg hunts and managing those events, and how do we make those events come alive for people. And so working with all kinds of different companies on doing that. And so Easter is a pretty busy season for us, internally, because we're working through all those events. And so when Easter was around the corner, we basically, the first thing that happened was we got a bunch of cancellations because we had Easter events and the Easter bunny booked at all these things at which they were not going to happen. And so, it took me a while, maybe a little bit longer, but at the same time, we had to figure out what we wanted to do. And where we sort of landed is, let's get creative and figure out how we can still activate the Easter bunny in a world where people are kind of just freaking out about, like, we have to be in home quarantined, and we can't really go out anywhere. And so we deployed this window side Easter bunny visits that we did. We used Sign Up Genius, which is a pretty popular
Sure.
software program that you can go and sign up stuff. And typically, like, your average or typical mom that's doing stuff for their local PTA or in their schools, they're familiar with Sign Up Genius. And so we decided to build this campaign around, hey, let's set a certain parameter of, like, near where we are, so Deer Park, LaPorte, League City, kind of the Bay Area, Houston area, and figure out how we can have the Easter bunny come to people's homes and do a window side, no contact. They wouldn't be able to touch the Easter bunny, but the Easter bunny would be able to come, maybe set some eggs down, drop off a little goodie basket, and just kind of be able to have a little bit of that Easter celebration piece that, the kids don't really understand the global pandemic. I mean, heck, sometimes we don't really understand how to deal with it, let alone explaining that to kids. And so,
Right.
anyway, we decided to kind of sort of pivot and activate that piece. We completely sold out within a couple of days. And I have to add that we ended up getting a news coverage on Fox 26, and they came out and did an interview and showcased, and our phones were ringing off the hook, and they were calling our team and trying to book. And it not necessarily the way I thought it was going to turn out, but in a good way. And it was just kind of one of the first sort of iterations of, like, how do we pivot our business and create a strategy that stays within the CDC and the local governing authorities guidelines, but allows us to sort of kind of maintain that endearing essence of what we want to be as a company.
I love that. And just, I know we're not really a kids show, although we're PG friendly and family friendly. If there's any kids listening, Pierre just happens to have a very good in with the Easter bunny, and that's how he's able to make this happen. Is that right, Pierre?
That is correct. That is correct. It's so good that it's just we get not just the Easter bunny, but the twin of the Easter bunny. And so, I mean, yeah, we have the right ends. You're 100% right.
Okay. So I love all of that. That's very interesting. I don't know how I missed that you were doing that. And I did see the Easter bunny on your website. And so I'll have to tune in on what's going to be happening with the Easter bunny and everything you guys have going on with that. I'm sure Easter will never be the same for y'all after going through
Well,
that.
yeah, and the interesting thing is now, as we're thinking about the upcoming holidays, and there's this big talk about what's going to happen with trick or treat and what are local authorities going to say regarding that, and then things like Santa Claus, and do we go to the local mall and get our pictures with Santa Claus? And these are things that the sometimes, whether it's the CDC or the local governing authorities, they simply don't have a clear directive for that. And so then it becomes an exercise of each company, whether it's a small business or it's a local mall or it's an event or a company that does a lot of events, to sort of have that conversation within their team and their leadership to be able to figure out like how is it that we adapt to this situation that we're living in. And so that's kind of really for us on the agency slash consulting side, where we kind of come in with me and my team, and have try to help those brands walk through that conversation, regarding what's feasible, what's not. And I think probably the most important thing is what are the optics of what I'm doing. And that's probably sometimes an overlooked piece of when, whether it's a local restaurant or it's somebody that's trying to say like, I just need to figure out a way to survive so that I can continue to bring cash in and also pay my people. And sometimes sort of skip through the optics of what they're doing, and from a long, big picture perspective, what it ultimately says about you as a brand, that whether it's that you're just in it for the money, or that you're being irresponsible, or for whatever it is, people sometimes don't necessarily pick up your intention the way you mean it. And that happens in our friendships and our relationships, but I think what people don't realize is that it happens within the kind of the relationships that people have with brands. That happens as well. And this has been just kind of a a stage to look at all these opportunities where brands are doing stuff, and it sort of maybe looks great on paper, but when you actually begin deploying it, it doesn't always necessarily have the effect that you want.
I think that you're so right, and that's why I think a third party perspective, from the consultant piece, like what you do, is so useful, because it really does. You don't have the skin in the game as far as going, hey, that may come off like this, or this may come off like that, and
Right.
that's such a big piece of it too, because sometimes with messaging, feel like you can't be thoughtful more. There isn't a more uh, bigger time that I've been alive where messaging needs to be thoughtful, like sort of
Right.
everything that's going on, you know, understanding there are many, many different circumstances. Just looking at schools from the teacher's perspective, to the parents, to the kids, to the school districts, to the all the local authorities trying to figure out, and state and federal, what's the right thing to do. There's so many opinions, unions, and everything, and just different types of messaging with every. And that's just one little tiny piece of this whole pandemic versus all the
Right.
other many things going on. So obviously, and this kind of leads into, I named this episode "The Party Never Ends." So besides the fact, of course, that I love Robert Earl Keen's the song "The Road Goes On Forever,"
Right.
because life is not stopping because of COVID-19. Grandmas are turning 90, kids are still graduating. We've got people still getting married. Businesses are still launching. We've got new products, new companies, or companies rebranding as to what they're going to look like, because there have been opportunities that have certainly come out of this situation, as well as industries changing. And so very different interaction with the workforce and all the things that are going along with this. So as businesses and employers move forward, let's say they want to launch a new product or host an event. Either they want to host an event for a client, or they want to host an event for their own company. How should they sort of move forward with that? And you kind of talked a little bit about how you start with the internal team, and then you work with the subcontractors and contractors for a consistent message. But I'll be honest with you, I have no idea. Like if I had like this, I have this fancy lipstick and I would like to launch it, Pierre, like I would have no idea where to start. I'd be like, well, maybe take a picture and put that up on Instagram. Like I'm not into a sort of mindset where I'm thinking about how to launch a product. And so can you kind of give us a little sneak peek on how that works, and what it looks like today?
So, the kind of the high level uh, pointers that we've been talking a lot within ourselves, but then also that we've been talking with our clients, has been, it almost kind of feels like a three-step process, in which you first have to lead with this sense of acknowledgement. And what I mean by that is, you've got to speak as a brand to your consumers, that you're 100% aware of what's happening. And the sort of the big kind of goal there is to never, from the optics perspective, you never want to come off across tone deaf, right? You don't want to come across like that you don't think this is serious, or that you think that this is not that the whether it's affecting you significantly or not. You simply just want to create, you want to establish a sense of you understand as a brand that that COVID is here, and that it is affecting us all in different capacities, and that your your first layer of filters that you use is the fact that we're in the middle of a global pandemic before you think about anything else, before you think about opening the doors, before you're thinking about whether it's your menus or the way that people can register or your refund policy for your events or any of those things. You're acknowledging the fact. So I always say like that the first phase of this is just we've got to acknowledge it, and then figure out kind of the internal pieces that need to be modified so that this acknowledgement basically becomes external as well. Whether it's you communicate on social media, or you put out some sort of short little tidbit on your website, or you create a video, or you do a YouTube and you're like, hey guys, I'm the owner of Joe's donut shop, and we've been closed for the last 3.5 weeks trying to figure out how we can be ready to serve our guests during the middle of this crisis. And so that piece is super important, because what it tells the consumer is they're not trying to live in la la land, or they're not trying to sort of hide under the covers until the storm passes by. They're well aware of what's going on, and that sort of, from the consumer standpoint, is like the first layer of like trust building into this new phase of what you're going to be doing. So that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is deals kind of more specifically with the communication aspect of kind of building this almost this calendar, or this rhythm of how do I communicate? What channels do I need to use to let folks know what it is that we're going to be doing, how it is that we're going to be operating moving forward? And then the third piece is that it sort of comes back circle, in that you're constantly sort of evaluating and reaching out and trying to have conversations with your consumers about what you can do differently, or what you can do better, so that you can stay connected and relevant with them. And some of that, there's words in there that you may be like, oh, staying relevant, I don't know, you're getting too much into like kind of marketing lingo, and so partly that's kind of why we have the work that we have, but really always tell people, whether you're hiring us or not, it's not, don't get intimidated by maybe the fanciness of the word, but really just sort of think through the piece of that. You've got to acknowledge what's going on, then you've got to communicate it, and then you've got to be in touch with your people to see what that communication and what those processes, what the optics of it are, so that you can go back to step one and acknowledge your new reality. And that's kind of the big key thing here is that the level of uncertainty that we have with before COVID was sort of a lot lower than the level of uncertainty that we have now because of COVID. And that affects everything. It affects the education sector, it affects businesses, it affects our day-to-day lives. Everything on planet Earth has gone from a high level of certainty to a super low level, or a very high level of uncertainty to a very low level of certainty. We don't really know what's going to happen next week. And, there was a time probably in April and May where that was even higher than it is now. I think it's sort of slowly course correcting, and we're learning to adapt and figure things out between us as consumers, brands, businesses, local government, countries. But that level of, I think back to like April and May, and it was rough. You literally were sort of operating on a day-to-day basis, because it was like Thursday And you would see on the news like the governor's going to have a press conference tomorrow, and you had no idea what he was gonna say.
Yeah.
But he got on at 8 in the morning and said at 12 all the bars are closing. And
Yeah.
so that's very unprecedented. That's not something that we're used to dealing with. And so when you think about as a business, as a brand, how you digest that, how whether if you're a bar and you just got shut down by the governing authorities,
Yeah.
you then go through the process of acknowledging it, communicating it, and reaching out to your consumers to figure out if you're doing the right thing or not, or what the optics of that situation is, adding to the layer of actually executing your business, and figuring out what you're going to do with your staff and people that potentially get sick. And so I think that was, man, I like to say if you made it through April and May, like, my gosh, like we're like warriors on the other side of that. And it's certainly not over. And we've certainly got our work cut out for us. But I sort of think, and some people may disagree, but I sort of think that was kind of the toughest part of it when we were sort of in this day to day to day to day, because literally something that you heard today could be, you were told A today, and the next day the mayor was on saying something completely different, and then the governor was telling you something completely different, and then this thing was closed and this was open, and then social distancing. And so it was just a lot for, I think, us in general to digest. And I think overall now we're in a place where we have maybe a little bit more leeway to be able to go through that process of acknowledging what's happening, creating a messaging strategy to communicate that, and then figuring out how you sort of tweak and figure out if what you're doing is best for your consumers or not.
Yeah, I think that the yeah, this uncertainty you're talking about because of course I'm talking to businesses in many different industries, and a lot of them were frustrated to find out that maybe while they felt they were essential, the government had not deemed them essential, and all of a sudden, they were needing to, completely shut down
Mhm.
huge pieces of the medical community that weren't doing what they considered essential procedures, and that was frustrating. And all of this has been sort of very distracting to any sort of goals you might have had as a business here in 2020, where you're really in a survival mode, like you're talking about on this day to
Right.
day thing. And I think for me, I've had I kept having clients be, or other business owner friends and people thinking, well, maybe in the summer it'll be better, or maybe in the fall it'll be better. And some of them, I think, have just concluded and said, well, it'll be great in 2021. Like they've just decided somehow COVID's going to get a text message that this is all going to be over in December 31st, 2020, and 2021 is going to be a brand new day. And so obviously we don't have a crystal ball. We can't figure all that out. I do think that maybe whatever, is it Time Magazine or whoever that picks the word of the year, they're going to either pick like the new normal or pivot, because those are probably like the words I've heard the most. And one thing that businesses can count on is that they can't really know what is, coming next. So I think it's interesting that you're telling me that if they're going to be planning for something, they got to figure out the message, if I'm getting this right, Pierre, you can correct me, but that they can't really figure out what their real new message is right now if they don't actually know what the heck is going on with their consumer group. So if your target market is 20 to 30-year-olds, that's very different than what's maybe going on with, 50 to 70-year-olds right now. So
Right.
figuring out what's going on with them and how to like be sincere in the message that you're bringing before you get to the optics of what kind of food are you going to have I mean, if your whole market is older generational people that have been deemed by the CDC to be more vulnerable right now to COVID-19, then an in-person event may not make sense for your market. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, and the big thing I would say is that um, business owners, or maybe businesses in general, sometimes um, spend a lot of time focused on the makeup of the sale versus on the makeup of the consumer. And what COVID has done is kind of force our hand to sort of shift that, right? And because the government or the governing authorities have kind of they've made the terms of the makeup of the cell. In other words, only 25% capacity. These businesses can't be open. You have to be 6 feet apart. You have to wear masks and kind of the transactional piece. But the consumers themselves, which sometimes businesses they say they're interested in what the makeup of the consumer is, but as a business owner, you're really sort of more interested in the makeup of the business and the infrastructure and what is it going to take to create the sale, versus the makeup of the consumer. And so when you talk about the generational aspect of it, there's a huge difference in between the way that an older demographic is gonna sort of digest the situation and therefore consume their dollars versus the younger generation. And so that's a piece that plays a huge role in what you decide to do. And so then you're not so much focused on the sale, the transaction piece, but now you're focused on, well, heck, I got to look at every 10 customers that come in. How many of those are on the older end, on the younger end? Or how many of those are families, multi-people, units, or is it families, or is it just one person? Is it working professionals? Is it people that have been laid off? Is it the frontline workers that I guess my consumers were frontline workers, but that wasn't really a thing up until COVID. It was like we saluted our veterans on Veterans Day, and we mourned for our armed forces on Memorial Day, and you had these like buckets where you dedicate certain allegiances or salutes to these special populations. But now those things really play into the kind of the way that your business is going to be is going to be the way that people are going to consume your business. And so that's another sort of a big area, a big segment for conversations to be had that maybe just weren't happening before.
Yeah, and I definitely think the demographic age groups are maybe viewing COVID-19 differently. Certainly, I've seen some, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm in my early 40s, and like the
Oh, you're so young, Trisha.
that like some conversations I've had with 90-year-olds, they kind of are like, we've like lived through all of this. Like, what is this COVID thing? You know what I mean? They're not like,
Yeah.
I only have so much longer to live. You think I'm going to stay home, locked in my room, like get food delivered? Like, what? So I can, I mean, it's very interesting to me actually. But then, you have a whole segment of, that the baby boomers, right? Where, and they're kind of, right at that age, just turning into, the 60s and 70s and sort of like looking at how they feel about it. So it is interesting. And like, it's different. I wondered what you thought about the hybrid events. Where is that like, have you seen any of that? Is that successful? Is it super too complicated for anyone to try to do, where you have like the virtual going on as well as the in-person?
So kind of the short answer is that there's the 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 result of what's happening now sort of fills into three buckets. One, where people are not doing their events because they're waiting for the opportunity to do their event as it was what we call BC.
Wait a minute, are you saying denial, that they're in denial?
Possibly, and I don't know if they're in denial. They certainly haven't gone through the acknowledgement piece we were talking about earlier, but they're certainly under the covers, right? They're like, this is there's gonna be a point in which people are gonna be sick and tired of doing all the social distancing and the mask, and they're just simply gonna be like, you know what? There's a risk. There's people that are gonna get sick. We just need to go back to the way it was. Now, personally, I would tell you, I don't think that that's necessarily gonna happen. I don't think that there's and if it does, I don't think that it's any time within possibly our lifetime. I think it's gonna take years, decades before things look like anything like before.
Oh,
But there
wait a
is
minute.
that.
Right now, Pierre, all the people you are going to crawl under the covers now with that statement.
Yeah,
They're going to be
probably right. And so the reality is for you to crawl under the covers, power to the people that are deciding to do that, whether it's individuals or brands or businesses. But it just simply is, to me, is not the most ideal move, because you're going to be waiting a long time before you can pull off, your event the way that it was before COVID. The second sort of what's come out is people that are doing strictly virtual events, where you're taking your event and saying, how do we take the contact piece out and make it completely virtual? And that's where, you're like the platform that we're using now, and Zoom and video calling, and now you've got the emergence of these companies that have traditionally done technology heavy type of events that are kind of now like living in their dream world, because all those businesses and events and companies that are used to doing that are now deciding to do that, and they've got their work cut out for themselves. So we produce an event called LeaderCast, which is the world's largest leadership conference. And the way they do it is they do it out of Atlanta, and then they sell the licensing rights to cities all around the world to host the event. So we're like a licensee down here in the Bay Area, Houston area. And but this event has been going on for 17 years. And so this company has been producing this type of technology forward event for years. And now they're seeing basically everything go sort of, not everything, but for the most part, a big chunk of that go in that direction of this virtual only event. But the challenge there is going to be to figure out, when you're doing a virtual event, what are the elements of the in-person event that people really value? If somebody pays you $100 to go to a conference, what elements of that $100 ticket are derived from the in-person experience? Whether it's the lunch that you get to
I
have,
just see
or
no chicken lunch there. Where's my
correct. And so, so that's kind of where the work is cut out for those folks in that middle bucket that say, hey, like, okay, we're going to go completely all virtual, and we're going to figure out a way to try to deliver as much value. But then what you ultimately end up with is, you don't end up with a $100 ticket. You probably have to go with a $50 ticket that's cheaper, because you're not able to deliver some of those in-person elements. And so somebody's not going to pay you $100 for something that they could go get in person. And so that's kind of what that, for us, what I've seen that second bucket look like. And then the third and last bucket has been what you're talking about, which is a hybrid event, and this notion of saying, why don't we address both the market or the consumer that says, I'm ready to go to an in-person event and take all the safety precautions that go along with it, and then also address the folks that are like, nope, not going to do it. I'm going to stay at home, but I do want to add value to myself, and I want to participate in these things. And so let me figure out a way to do it virtually. And so from the event production side, this hybrid event is kind of the best of both worlds, right? Where you're able to bring in the in-person element, and then also have the virtual piece. That probably is the most work out of the three buckets. Certainly the bucket where you go under your covers is the least amount of work, because you just sort of like riding out the storm, waiting for this thing to go back to normal. And then we'll see you when you come out of hibernation.
which could be January 1st, 2021, according to some people that have talked to me.
According to some people, it could be January 1st,
They truly believe
2021.
this will all be over this year, or they're just
No.
positive thinkers, right? Look at that.
And that's great. But but the third bucket is where the most amount of work is, because you're having to sort of deploy your playbook for the event in person, with the added layers of social distancing, mask, and whatever precautions are in place that come from the local governing authority, that come from the venue where you're having it at, that come within the jurisdiction of where you're at. And then that, one of the factors that takes into place is what kind of event you're having. And so if you have a lot of networking events where you're doing, what they call that kind of business speed networking thing, where you're exchanging cards and shaking hands and doing that, That's got a lot more contact than a general conference where you're going to see somebody speak, right? And you're not necessarily being asked to necessarily shake hands and exchange things. And let me give you my card, and here's my card, and there's all these kind of exchanges where you're touching stuff. The makeup of the event also plays into how much work you're going to have to do into deploying that live in person book. But then you've got to take all of that work and you got to say, now how do we deploy it virtually? And then for hybrid events, you also have to think about, do I want to do the in-person event and stream it or broadcast it live at the same time as it's happening? What do we do within those gaps whenever there's an in-person component that doesn't necessarily apply to the person that's watching it from home? Like lunch, for example, you're not gonna stream in a day-long conference people just eating there while the person is at home watching that. And so you've got to think about how that plays out. What I have seen is kind of this type of hybrid event where you have access to attend the event in person, and you're able to see maybe one or two, like maybe the keynote speaker or maybe the most important piece of the element of the event that you can see live. But then the rest of the conference, the breakout sessions, the virtual shopping, any of those things that are attached to it, the informational seminars are basically what they end up doing as an on-demand feature. So that the reason Netflix is so powerful and has grown so much is because it puts the power to be able to choose what you want to watch on the consumer end, right? Versus what the TV set wants to play at that programming time, or what we're used to calling linear TV. And so when you think about attending an event, what if you attended a conference, a leadership conference, where you got to see your favorite keynote speaker live, just like everybody else in that person, and then everything else you could go and see for the next 7 days on your own time, carve out maybe an hour or two of your day for the next week on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, attend the breakout sessions, the workshops, do the virtual shopping, get your own shopping code, and to be able to go and see the exhibitors or talk to some of the sponsors. And so that's sort of kind of the direction that we're going within our in-house events, is creating kind of something that delivers something of an in-person element, but then also adds a layer of on-demand or in-demand access. And that for us has been kind of the ideal sort of spot to land in when it comes to not biting off more than what we can chew. Because pulling off a virtual event and an in-person event, in other words, a hybrid event in which you're doing both at the same time, is a lot of work. And I just had a conversation last week with a client that they're doing a big conference here at South Shore, and they're doing it in March, but they want to be able to do it live, and the person, if they can't come for whatever reason, they can just watch the whole thing all day, from their house. And I told them, I said, it's doable. It's going to cost you more money, but it's doable. But just know that if something goes wrong, and with technology and the internet and all these things, if things go wrong and you have a 500 person event, and 200 are at your place in person and the other 300 are virtual, you good luck trying to appease 300 people that are hacked off because they can't access it, they can't get the code, their streamers not their browser's not working, they got a virus, Windows decided to do an update, and there's all these things of which some of them are your fault, some of them are your fault, are not. But at the end of the day, I just wouldn't sign up for that kind of headache, that kind of risk that comes with a huge headache that ultimately leaves you with these 300 people that are just not happy with the experience that they have. And that can happen too in an in-person event. But I don't know. I've always just been of the philosophy that, man, if I have the person in front of me, I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time. But when I don't, I can go to that person and apologize and make amends and figure out how I can make it right for them. It's just a lot more harder to be able to do that with 300 people that are in 300 different spaces.
Yeah. So if you did it all virtual, though, you'd still kind of have that challenge, right, Pierre?
You would have that challenge, but all of your energy that you're using to do the in-person event is not being utilized in the in-person event because you're doing all virtual. And so basically, when we're looking at all virtual events, the team that you're bringing in, or that you're, whether it's us or whatever production company you hire, that's all they're doing. And so you build basically a help desk that, depending on the size of your event, but for a 500 person team, you're going to build out about 5 to 6 people. So about 100 to 1 ratio of basically 5 people that are just sitting there waiting for somebody to chat with, to call them, to chat them, to send them a text, to send them an IM. And whether it's a 65-year-old lady that doesn't know how to open Chrome to an advanced young professional that is having an issue with their browser, they're going to have somebody that can attend to that. And so, the infrastructure of the event is built out to be able to address that.
Yeah, that's interesting because I also wonder how that's all going to play out with the costs. Because certainly, if you're just going to transfer your in-person event to a virtual event, like you are going to be missing things like the chicken lunch or the whatever, and or the opportunity to network. How do you create that virtually for these people,
Right.
or do you lessen the cost? I mean, so
Right.
that people don't feel like, wait a minute, you charged me this for us to be at this fancy hotel, this X amount of money, and now you're doing all this online. And I don't know if people just kind of start to get distrust for that, like that it's the same price, like if
They
they're
do.
not really understanding where the difference in the money went.
They do 100%. They 100% don't. I mean, we've seen it already with projects that we've worked on, and informally we've surveyed folks, and they're like, no, such and such person. I can remember who they were talking, but somebody kind of like an Oprah, like a Tony Robbins and stuff, was doing a thing, and they typically charge $2,500 for their big weekend long seminar that's going to change your life forever. You go to Miami and it gets, and you get to do all these kinds of fun exercises, and then you get to see the speaker and you get to do all the stuff. And now they had gotten an invitation to do it virtually and it was the same price. And they were like, no, I'm not in Miami. I'm not getting to do all these things. I'm not in this arena with 10,000 people. And so there is something to be, that's not everybody, but
Yeah.
there is a segment of the population that does not believe that a virtual event can cost the same as an in-person event, just because the numbers in their head simply don't make sense, regardless of whether the company on the production side says, hey, we're not spending 10 grand on production on site, but we're going to spend that 10,000 on the infrastructure of the virtual event to deliver the most immersive experiences possible. People just don't buy that.
Yeah.
Maybe they will in the future, or in the next couple of years as we evolve into understanding the power of how much virtual events can deliver the same, if not more value, if you do them right. But on the consumer end, people aren't there yet.
They aren't there yet. Yeah, yoga on Zoom is not the same as yoga on the beach in Miami. I'm sure it's totally
Correct. That is correct.
The morning yoga before they get into their classes. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, this is a really good chat. I feel like we've talked about a lot of stuff. I just wanted to see if you could touch a little bit on the power of social media with all of this. Like, are people overwhelmed by media? Or I feel like people are using media more than ever now because they're home and they are looking at things. It's just, I wonder if they're looking at things differently now.
So we just had I just went to it was a virtual workshop, and the speaker was talking about this sort of the way that storytelling evolves in this, has evolved in the social media world. And the biggest thing that we did as marketing coaches, consultants, when Facebook and what was sort of kind of in the adoption phase, in the phase where it had been out for maybe 4 or 5 years, and not the mass market had adopted. Facebook came out as a college thing. It was only for people that were in college, and you can only sign up with your email had to be a .edu extension, and I was in school at the time. I was at the University of Houston. I got my degree in broadcast journalism, and so I was one of the early onset
Oh.
adopters of well, at that point it was called the Facebook. Now it's just called Facebook. But so I had an account on the Facebook, and the only way it could be verified was if you signed up using your college.edu account, and then they would send you the verification to that, and that's how you could activate the
The
account. But
the
uh,
Facebook. That's how you activated the Facebook.
that's how you activated the Facebook. And so, but what was interesting is, about 4 or 5 years into that, you know, people really looked, business owners looked at Facebook as this opportunity to do free advertising. And when you think about advertising, you mostly think about driving sales. You don't necessarily think of storytelling. And when you think about storytelling for business owners or for marketers, they think of PR. You know, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna get a free story ran in the Chronicle or in the paper and the local. They're gonna come out. The local reporter is gonna come out and do a story on us. That's free publicity. That's PR. That's an opportunity for us to tell our story." And so then when Facebook and social media really kind of began to take mass market adoption, um, people weren't deploying that strategy of storytelling or what we would consider PR. They were really they were really adopting that platform as a way to sell. Um, and so the interesting thing is that Facebook, in order to survive, has implemented platforms to be able to sell, but the actual organic platform itself of your business page or your personal page is really meant, we believe that it's meant for storytelling. It's meant for it can be used for you to tell, or for you to tell people things that you're selling at your shop or services that you provide, or asking folks to get a quote for your local insurance agency, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's a social media platform in which you use to consume and watch pictures of your niece and nephew and their birthday and the graduation party of your brother and the celebration. That is what we go and look on there for. And that same exact sort of formula applies to brands. We don't want necessarily a brand to sell to us on Facebook on our news feed, because that's kind of it just feels intrusive, right? And so, are there ways to sell on social media? Yes, 100%, absolutely. But there, those strategies typically work best when they're complemented with a storytelling strategy of being able to kind of carry the relationship and say, meet our employee of the month, John Doe. He likes, such and such, and he likes long walks at Miami Beach, and he likes to go to this place, and blah, blah, and his favorite author is, Stephen King or whatever. Storytelling is a way for you to grow your brand, in a way that people sort of begin to build a relationship, and social media is a great way to do that without the consumer necessarily having to be on your turf. And so, I think that sort of formula is more important now than ever before, because we've been limited to being able to be at businesses location, whether it's by capacity or because they're closed or whatever. But I've seen examples of companies that had to close because they were deemed non-essential, but they were continuing to update and put stuff on social media. And that was storytelling, because it certainly wasn't a call to action to come and buy for them. They were closed. You couldn't. But they were talking about what they were doing. They were talking about, the guy that came to sanitize the place. They were talking about, how they were redoing their tables because they were closed. And so they were bringing in some of the staff to go and clean and get gum from under the tables, and just finding just creative ways to stay engaged and relevant with people that doesn't necessarily equate to saying come and buy from us. And so, to a degree, it's been kind of fun and exciting to see the way some of these companies have really leveraged that opportunity, where they've been, sort of, you know they've been forced to not operate from a business perspective, but still operate from a brand story perspective. And Corona again, kind of maybe unfortunately, but it's made us have to do that. And social media is kind of the front and center platform that is allowing us to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's that's a lot I hadn't thought about that. So the storytelling is still there. It was there before and it's still there now. It's just so you feel like social media, as far as you telling your story, it's still the same. It's just be thoughtful of that it's not just like, hey, we haven't really ever advertised our product online. We're jumping on Facebook. Maybe think about how you tell that story. That's interesting that you say that, because I know quite a few businesses did a lot of very interesting things when they were closed to try to keep those employees employed, and just sort of be creative as to how to do it. But okay, do you want to do the legal skinny rundown with me?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, so beach or mountains,
Beach.
Elvis or the Beatles,
Elvis.
most influential book you've read. I know you read a lot, so
Ooh, that's a good one. Most influential book. Um, I just finished "Great Leaders Ask Great Questions" by John Maxwell, and so I would say maybe that's one of my favorite books. But let me just expand to say that John Maxwell is probably one of my favorite authors. So I'll leave it at that.
all right. So, dead or alive, what famous person would you invite to dinner?
Ooh, I should have read these before. Dead or alive. Oh my goodness. Um, so I don't know um, if you're gonna have any um, uh, listeners from that are Hispanic or Latino, but there is this artist called Celia Cruz, and she was kind of an icon. She recorded Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" in Spanish, but that was just one of the things that she did. Another thing that she did, she had a very successful career, singing salsa Latin music. And so, anyway, she was one of the few people that had a tribute done while she was alive, because most tributes are done after the person passes away. And anyway, she was a person that I think had sort of a large personality, kind of like me. Maybe I connect with her in that regard, but I think brought a lot of joy to people all over the world with her music and her spirit. And so that's probably somebody I would love to have dinner with.
Very cool. I do love I Will Survive. I like the cake version, though. It's a
I'll have to
little
send you the version she recorded. It's in Spanish, but the other interesting thing is there's a video on YouTube when they did the tribute, and at the tribute, Gloria Gaynor sang the first half of "I Will Survive" as she sings it in English, and the other half she sang it in Spanish the way that Celia Cruz had recorded it. It was
Oh,
it
I
was,
love
it was
that.
amazing. Like, it just, you watch it and like brings you goosebumps, and it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, you'll have to share that with me. I love
I
it.
will.
Okay, so finally, in 1 minute or less, what is the skinny on either launching an event or product successfully, or at least the party going on forever?
I would say probably, the one of the biggest things I always tell folks is, um, focus first on what the consumer experience needs to look like, and then second on all the work that's going to be required to be able to do that. Um, but at the same time, you gotta think about both, because on the first end, you don't want to think about just the work that's going to require on your end to pull it off, because that's kind of just self-serving or a little bit selfish. But it's important for you to think about that, because you don't want to either you want to under promise and over deliver. You don't want to bite off more than what you can chew. And so, in that regard, it's important to think about that second element. But the first, to me, the most important element is what is the person gonna what do I want the person to experience when they come to my event, to my seminar, to my party, to my celebration? What are the outcomes of that experience? What does that need to look like? And I think it just merits for you to really be thoughtful about sort of creating that, almost kind of like a piece of art, so that everything you build is focused around the person experiencing it, not what's my budget and this is what I have, and I don't want to spend this, or I have to do it at this place. And, where kind of where I see typical conversations start, which is very much on the, what do I have to do with it? Like, it starts with me versus what's the experience that I'm trying to create for the other person or for the consumer end. Hopefully that was under a minute.
Probably not.
Sorry.
Oh, don't even worry about it. I love it anyway. You bring such good stuff. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can call or text. I am such a texter. And I don't know if it's because I'm a millennial, but my phone number is 281-935-0656. Or they can email me as well at Pierre, my name. You can see it right there on the screen, at topstarmarketing.com.
Anyway, so thanks again, Pierre.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Trisha.
And that's the Legal Skinny on The Party Never Ends.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Legal Skinny Podcast. Do not forget to subscribe to get future podcast episodes. Also, check out LegalSkinny.com to join our newsletter and get details on all the educational resources we offer the employer. Also, disclaimer, remember Legal Skinny is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Laws change or they differ by jurisdiction. So also remember, this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.